during the time that Zimbabwe experienced hyperinflation, Charlie, they were printing a banknote that was a $100 trillion banknote.
Everyone out there, are you happy with what you've got right now, or would you like more? The answer is usually, I would like more, please.
We're living in this world that has no connection to a real form of money with the world's reserve currency, in a world where all major superpowers have access to nuclear weapons.
Welcome to another episode of the Bullion Standard Podcast. We're going to talk today, Kyle, brother, about we need to stop talking about inflation as the problem. Inflation is a symptom of a deeper problem.
Let's talk about the fact that the Fed has an annual inflation target of 2%, Charlie. This means the Federal Reserve wants to intentionally devalue the currency by 2% per year. Why do you think they would want to do that? Wouldn't it make sense to have a 0% inflation target? Or is that Fed's 2% target the symptom of this thing where we call it the perpetual money printer, where the only way forward is to continually and perpetually increase the money supply? So what do you think about all that?
I mean, we could talk about maybe what that's rooted in, and what's the purpose of a 2% inflation target? Well, we want to grow, right? We want to grow and expand. You're either green and growing or ripe and rotting is an old statement. It's an old saying. So yeah, what's that rooted in? That's rooted in our human behavior as well. Like, everyone out there, are you happy with what you've got right now, or would you like more? The answer is usually, I would like more, please. And so that might be one way to look at it. And so, the expansion of the money supply and credit may not be the root of all evil. It might be our insatiable appetite as human beings to acquire a little bit more. It's a survival mechanism. It's a very useful survival mechanism. We need to accumulate a little bit of something extra today, so when tomorrow, if what we need isn't there, we can pull from that resource. And that's kind of the definition of short-term sacrifice, long-term gain. When we say the word inflation, that's not the thing that we really should be pointing to in these conversations. It's, what's the cause of inflation? And so, even when we look at our central banks, the ones that issue money, the ones that print money, the ones that buy assets with printed money, is that something that we should abolish? Well, probably not. We probably don't want to get rid of that. It's very useful to bridge gaps. And I think that's one of the original intentions of central banks. Bridge a gap when there's a crisis. You don't want a crisis to end up imploding the entire system, and then you have massive deflation, and then everyone's starving across the globe.
Well, it's interesting because the Fed was created as a result of banking panic. And one of the original intentions was to prevent these boom-bust kind of cycles and to bridge a gap of stability when none existed prior to that. I think there was a banking panic in 1908, I believe, and that was kind of one of the things that led to the creation of the Fed. There's been a couple of different attempts at a central bank. Andrew Jackson, one of the first presidents of the U.S., was notorious for hating central banks, and I think he went on some kind of journey to destroy one. I don't know the specific history behind that, but I've read about it. But it's interesting because the Fed was created to kind of create stability in a way, but ever since its creation, it's just done the exact opposite. And we've had these extreme boom and bust cycles because, as we know, we've talked about, the Fed is reactionary and it's not proactive. And also, on top of that, I want to talk about the fact that the Fed's 2% inflation target might be getting bumped up to 3%, as it doesn't appear that inflation is going to come back down anywhere near 2%. And it's, been on an uptrend for the past few cycles. So I'll leave you with that to kind of ponder on and hear your thoughts on, Charlie.
Yeah, going back to the creation of the Fed, I think we have had multiple central banks, if you look back through time and across the globe. We've also had our government in charge of issuing currency. I think one of the reasons why we have one uniform currency right now is because there was a time when we had multiple currencies in the United States. We had banknotes, we had government notes, we had people transacting in gold and silver, we had all this different money, if you will. And so, that all ended up under a central authority, with the Fed and with the US dollar. It's really interesting as I'm saying this, it's like, oh yeah, maybe that is part of a solution, is to kind of have multiple forms of currency that kind of check and balance themselves, just like we have multiple forms of governance that check and balance themselves with our, 3 different branches. So maybe there is no currency fix. There's just different structures that might give us a more ideal. So yeah, what do you think about that, Kyle? Should we go back to carrying around gold coins and handing them over at the local convenience store?
Well, there's a company who's manufacturing, I think it's called a gold back right now, and it's I don't know what material. I think it's like polymer or something, and then it has gold embedded in it, and it's like a physical bill. Mm-hmm. And they come in very, very low fractions of gold. But if you were to, have like a stack of these things on a per ounce basis, it's something like double the spot price. It's like
right.
$5,000 or $6,000 for an ounce of gold backs. But that is a product being pumped right now that, is, you suggest, in states like Florida. And I think there's a few more in the Midwest that have passed similar legislation where you can use them as legal currency. Mm-hmm. And I've even watched a video, I think, of somebody try to spend one, and it's really comical. But Bitcoin, that's a whole nother conversation. I think what you said earlier, yeah, we did have all these different forms of money. We had United States notes, we had gold certificates, we had silver certificates, but it all was the same thing. It was for dollars, and dollars were always pegged to gold. $20 for a gold double eagle coin or gold Liberty double eagle, and 1 ounce of gold was pegged at $20.67. And if you multiplied that by, I think it's 0.9675, which is the gold content in a $20 gold piece, that would equate to $20 face, with gold being $20.67 per ounce. So I think that central banking probably is more destructive than it is beneficial. I think there's a lot of people out there who would probably agree with me in that notion because of all the stuff that's been a consequence since the Fed has come into existence.
Let's distinguish that a little bit more. So when you say more destructive than beneficial, we could probably distinguish that as long-term.
Yes.
In the short term, it bridges gaps. Great. What a useful tool. And the long term, you pay the price. So in past conversations, we've said something like, you're deferring the interest on that short-term solution. You're taking out a little bit of a loan on, the future in order to bridge a gap in the current, present breakdown. And eventually, that's going to need to get paid.
Right. And so the thing with the Fed is, since it's come into existence, our currency, the US dollar, has lost almost all of its purchasing power in the high 90%. And that's shocking to me. Like, why would that be the case? The dollar didn't lose that kind of destruction of purchasing power when we were on the gold standard. And also, given our current circumstance today here, as we find ourselves in the year 2025, if anything were to happen and we needed to with inflation, and we got runaway inflation, not hyperinflation, but maybe very, very high inflation, the cure and the remedy for that would be to hike interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do that today in the same capacity that we did in the late 70s and the early 80s because of the debt situation we find ourselves in. Back then, debt was very nominal relative to GDP. So if we try to hike interest rates with a national debt of $38 trillion, we're talking interest payments that could potentially exceed all gross federal receipts. That would be unsustainable, and the Fed would have to lower interest rates. Of course, that would cause runaway inflation. And this is one of those things where I've talked about on several episodes now, this thing versus death by inflation or death by deflation. There's no way out, given enough time with this current system. If we were on a gold standard, I don't think that would ever be the case because there'd always be that stability. Gold would always be pegged at a certain amount, and there would be no possibility to inflate it unless you could print gold. But of course, the first time gold really was printed in America was 1933, 1934, when we revalued it from $20.67 to $35, and then we stole everybody's gold.
If we decided here in the U.S. to go back onto a gold standard, and every other country in the world decided that they wanted to not go onto a gold standard, they would probably get a little short-term benefit from that. And what is short-term benefit? How long does that last for? Would that be a decade? Would they outpace the United States for a decade? Like, what would the consequence of that be? Yeah, of course they would ultimately hyperinflate. Let's bring up, the World War II scenario. What was happening in World War II, right before World War II? Well, there was a lot of funny money getting made, the German government made their own unique money. I can't remember what it was called. And they funded the build out of the war machine with this German fake money, with the promise to all the manufacturers who are making tanks and planes and guns and ammunition that they would honor that. And so they kept that kind of captured in its own isolated system. If they didn't succeed in their initial, blitzkrieg, how long would the war have lasted? Probably they would have ran out of money.
Right.
So it's really interesting. So, okay, so are we in this cat and mouse game on a global scale where, oh, well, you're going to print money, so I'm going to print money too?
Doug Casey calls the US dollar something like the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry basket. I think he further too says it's the most the prettiest horse at the slaughterhouse. It's a garbage kind of fiat currency, but relative to all the other ones, it's still the kingpin. And then he also says something like, the dollar is an I owe you nothing. The euro would be described as a who owes you nothing. And if the BRICS had their own currency, it would be a nobody owes you anything. Of course, he references fiat currencies this way because it's a worthless piece of paper and it has this perceived value. And, it doesn't meet the qualifications of what we would have a definition for as money, particularly because it doesn't hold its value. Money has to hold its value. So the dollar would be a form of currency, not a form of money.
So is the BRICS currency ultimately going to be who owes who nothing, or whatever you just said?
Well,
no one owes anyone anything, or are they actually going to create something over the next couple of decades where it's backed by something of more substantial nature than paper?
I don't think it would be a gold-backed currency because that would imply that it would have to be a controlled unit of account where you couldn't devalue it. It would have to be something where all the reasons why you would want to have a gold-backed currency, they would probably violate in some kind of way. It restricts control. It restricts being able to expand the money supply. I don't know I don't think I'm smart enough to know what a true gold-backed currency would look like in 2025. And I think there's all kinds of rippling consequences, both positive and negative, that would likely become a result of that. And I guess it's like, how do you want to describe it? And could we get to the point where it would be transparent enough that if we all collectively agreed, hey, let's go back to a gold standard, would everybody have the will to say, okay, I accept these positive consequences and I also accept these negative consequences? Obviously, credit expansion would have to die just about.
Okay, well, let's pause right there and talk about that. So one of the reasons why we can't have a gold-backed currency system across the globe is because we need liquidity and there's a limited amount of gold. So, you have to have some sort of expansion of gold as a solid, finite product, not product, but like as a finite unit in order to keep the machines going. So how do you solve the liquidity issue? And so this is what we've got currently with our central banking systems and the debts and deficits and issuing currency out of thin air. So it's very useful. So there's no cure necessarily for this conundrum of this human conundrum of, hey, I would like a little more. Okay, so let's talk about what it would take to get back to a more fundamentally sound monetary system in our banking systems and in our governments. Let's look at Argentina for a second. Argentina is going through a process where they're needing liquidity. We just have injected the opportunity to fund their economy from the U.S. I can't remember what it was called, but there's a line of credit essentially that we've issued to Argentina. That's a requirement when you go from funny money, liquidity as much as you need, to where you're restraining yourself. And so that's had to come from outside of the Argentinian banking system. So what would that look like on a global scale if everyone decided to do that? Who would bail who out? Like it doesn't exist. So, is there an answer to this thing that's called inflation? No.
It's called owning a little bit of real money, like gold, like silver. Argentina is led by, obviously, what's his name? Milei. Yeah, he just recently
Mr. Chainsaw.
Yeah, Mr. Chainsaw. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, cutting government with his chainsaw.
Okay, the reason you love that is because you have a bit of a reaction to the system of that we're talking about here with debts and deficits, with money supply, with credit expansion, and money supply expansion, and you're like, well, that's not right. Like coming back to our I love the conversations that come back to our human behavior where we can say, oh, isn't that so normal? Isn't that just how we all are as humans? And it is normal to say, I love that Milei got the chainsaw out. Isn't that great? It's not right that they're down, that everyone's out there printing money and causing this inflation. So really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here, our topic of, hey, is inflation isn't the enemy. Well, printing money and expanding the money supply and expanding credit is not the enemy. We're really what we're looking at is creating an opportunity to see things as, oh, this is just normal. this is just normal what we do here. This is a normal cycle that we're in. Maybe there isn't an enemy. Maybe we could just look at things as there's no right or wrong here. There's just trade-offs. And yet we go about judging inflation as right or wrong. And we go about judging our expansion of or tightening of credit and money supply as right or wrong. And we go about judging our human behavior of wanting to allocate a little extra resource, put in a little extra work today as right or wrong. And really we're just doing what we do, you know?
It's very complex what we're talking about. And I think it's something for everybody to understand would require, we would need to start teaching financial literacy and make it mandatory for everybody in high school or something like that. But the problem with that is I think if everybody truly understood what was going on with our monetary structure, specifically how the Fed works, I think there would be
revolt of the public,
torches and pitchforks tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. in Washington, D.C. at the Mariner Eccles building, the Fed building that was built in the shortly around the time of the Great Depression.
Well, that's happening, and it's been happening. I mean, the destabilizing social agreements, the destabilization in our social agreements has been happening, since the GFC, since the dot-com bubble, since we've started these massive QE cycles.
Yep.
People have felt that, and they're like, no, I'm not okay with this. And then it's been tamped down through, we'll call it boiling of the frogs, right? We're all getting boiled a little bit at a time. Just this 2%, everyone. It's only 2%. We'll call bull on that.
I remember the first QE series, QE1, QE2. I remember QE3, and I remember being shocked by it. And I thought it would have translated to tons of inflation. And on a prior episode, Charlie, we talked about you said a comment that the experiment worked in, post 2008, post GFC.
For now.
The money printing experiment. And I wanted to expand on that after kind of rewatching that last episode that we filmed. It didn't work. I think it was just a papered over form of a Band-Aid. Well, and so that money can fester in the system, and it's been created and not destroyed. And so it's just a matter of time before it rears its ugly head. And this is where I go into the fact that I call post-1971, post-August 15th specifically, one of the greatest experiments in recorded human history. What do I mean by that? I mean that we're living in this world that has no connection to a real form of money with the world's reserve currency in a world where all major superpowers have access to nuclear weapons. This has never existed before. So in that context, it's truly a fascinating time to be alive. And I don't think anybody has enough foresight to say, this thing is just perfect system. It's just going to keep going forever.
Kyle, there is no perfect system.
Right. And if you look back in time and you look at these cycles that have repeated in the past, we're kind of in one that's very similar to how things have gone in the past. And so what's the right answer here?
The right answer is there is no right answer. One of the answers is, whether you think it's working or you don't think it's working, whatever it is, depends on that point in time that you're making the observation. So what's working today may not work tomorrow. What's working in 10 years may not work today. And so everyone has to choose, how much sacrifice they're willing to put in today for things to work tomorrow. And if we cumulatively agree that, hey, it's time to take our medicine, then tomorrow will get a little bit better, in theory.
Right before Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, and then their monetary system got a reset. During the time that Zimbabwe experienced hyperinflation, Charlie, they were printing a banknote that was a $100 trillion banknote. You could buy these as a novelty today. I think they sell for between $100 and $200 for an uncirculated example. But given enough time with our current structure, and the big thing here is how long is it going to be? But given enough time, that will be a reality here in the United States. But the big question, again, I'm not trying to be a doomer here or bring the doom and gloom. Yeah, but
you enjoy getting to the doom and gloom side of things. Come on.
Yeah, given enough time, that will happen. It's just when, because we have an annual inflation target to devalue the system by a minimum of 2% per year. And that ebbs and flows. Obviously, if we have another 1970s style waves of inflation, which I think we're in right now, and I think we're going to be talking about the second wave of inflation a lot more in 2026 and 2027.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Bookmark this video. Come back to this in 2 years from now, and I think there will be a second wave of inflation. I don't like to make grand crystal ball predictions, but I just don't see any way around that at this time.
Yeah.
But given enough of that, and then you get in this hectic feedback loop where it's like inflation begets inflation. You got to print more and more and more. This is how you get the $100 trillion banknote. And when that happens, that will be devastating. And so how do you protect yourself against that? Again, own a little bit of gold.
Own a little bit of gold, own hard assets. What do people need? Well, they need a roof over their head. Real estate is a hedge. Everything cycles. And what's the thing that they use in energy? What's in energy and mining? Like every deficit is followed by a glut. So every time that there's, and it's just a lag, right? So it's like every time that there's, something that's missing, human beings will find a way to fill the gap.
You're talking about something we are a student of Rick Roll here at Bullion Standard. We love Rick. He talks about the fact that high prices cure high prices and low prices cure low prices.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
What you're talking about is that when prices are low, production decreases. This creates supply scarcity. And then when prices are high, of course, that fixes high prices, production increases, supply increases, which leads to gluts. This is most notable in the uranium market that's very fascinating.
Well, anything that takes time, right? Like in mining, it takes time to find a deposit. It takes time to permit a mine. It takes time to, pull the material out of the ground and process it. So, these things happen with a lag. And so, there's always going to be a gap. And this is why we have cyclicality in things. This is why we have seasons. And so this is why we have a season with inflation. And at the end of the day, if you can identify for yourself what season we're in and it makes sense and you have conviction around it, then you could say, okay, maybe I'm not going to worry as much about this. I'll just do what I know to do in order to, squirrel away an extra nut for next winter. So that way we can make it through. And, when you get really good at that, you can say, oh, isn't this interesting? Maybe I can take a little more action now. And then when, the payoff comes, it's like, oh, now I'm reaping the rewards of my time and effort and energy. And, I don't have to work as hard. But even that can be dangerous because as soon as you get the luxury of not having to work as hard, you're up against that you're either green and growing or ripe and rotting saying that we were talking about earlier. So in essence, everyone has to take on a certain amount of struggle or you get too comfortable. Everyone wants to be really comfortable. I was just talking with my daughter and mom and dad last night, and I was like, well, when was the last time you had to actually take a cold shower? We are so lucky. We are so lucky that we have hot water and indoor plumbing. It is fantastic. I'm so grateful for that. And yet we walk around every day as if it's a right or we deserve it. And, sometimes I feel that it's a right that I deserve. And, I have to put myself into a position where I'm working a little harder to make sure I recognize that it's not actually a guarantee,
I was going to wrap it up there, but I also want to share one more thought now that you said that. Living in the post 1971 world, the post Bretton Woods era, where the dollar is the reserve currency, we've all gotten to this certain standard of living, and that definitely includes the the right to a hot shower most of the time,
or whatever it is, fill in the blank, whatever modern life has allowed for.
I think any reduction in people's standard of living as a result of reeling in the constraints that we have as far as stable currency goes, I think that would just create mayhem in the streets. I think people would be pitchforks and
Kyle, we've
shovels.
had mayhem in the streets for the last, I don't know, for a very long time.
Well,
it got really bad in the George Floyd riots.
Well,
that was civil war.
I'm talking about like a depression or a very severe recession as a result of us needing to take our bad tasting medicine. Let's imagine a world where...
So you're talking about more that something that affects
where
the majority of the population.
Yeah, where the Fed chooses
austerity,
price stability, and austerity. Yeah, the government fiscally chooses austerity.
We tried to do that at the beginning of the year too, by the way.
That
was Doge.
If there was a true restoration of austerity, it would be torches and pitchforks. It would be suffering. It would be catastrophic.
Well, that's Argentina.
It would be that, okay, you're going to have a cold shower. Like, there's no choice. But hold on.
Well, and we're in California. For us Californians, we have these rolling blackouts that happen. So, that's a little bit of an interruption, and it's very rare.
In South Africa, that happens all the time. The utility there, Eskom, very commonplace to have rolling blackouts and just not very pleasant. But
it happens in a lot of places. Here's the interesting thing, and you've told me a lot about this. Like, there's places all over the planet. How many people don't have reliable electricity?
Somewhere around 1 billion.
Okay, there's 1 billion people out there that either don't have electricity or have very unreliable intermittent electricity. 1 billion people. They're not getting hot showers every night.
No, they're not. So that's kind of where I wanted to wrap it up there, Charlie, and just say, if we have any interruption with this cycle, with how it goes with this perpetual money printer, it would just be devastation. And, I think the Fed will be pulling all kinds of levers over the next few years as a reactionary response to all these different things that kind of are very reminiscent of the 1970s.
Okay, what's the antidote? What's the antidote for the individual? Because I'm not personally going to be doing a lot of effort trying to change our institutions. What can you do?
Have we done a sufficient enough job of plugging gold ownership on this episode yet? Because
Bullion Standard and Bullion Standard Pro. Okay. If you're interested in one thing that you could do, you could take a look at Bullion Standard Pro and bullionstandard.com and see where we're at with gold and silver prices. What's another thing you could do? Well, you could just take a look for yourself where you're at and, how are you preparing for interruptions in your life? How are you preparing for interruptions in money supply? How are you preparing for interruptions if maybe the power goes out? Do you have a little extra food, a little extra water? We might have some over the next few years, some times when it would be nice to have a little extra food and water around.
Although we are not preppers, nor are we advocating for people to take on the prepper role. The most important thing I think we could advertise is just to own a little bit of gold. Mm-hmm. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on another Bullion Standard episode. If you found this episode helpful, we would sincerely appreciate it if you would like, share, subscribe. Maybe somebody might get value out of this episode. Charlie, do you have any departing thoughts you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I'm just super grateful for a hot shower, man. I'm so grateful. Thank you, everyone. We are grateful for your time and attention. If you have any suggestions for us, you have any comments, please leave them. Again, like Kyle said, if you want to hit the subscribe button, we'd be honored. Thank you.
Remember, every ounce matters, and so does every insight. Remember to stay informed, stay committed to growth, and hold your bullion standard high.